Thank you for taking the time to attend this morning's webinar on making vendor self-service a reality. And with that, I give you Ben and Stephanie.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks everyone for joining. Before we get started, just a little bit about us. We're RPI consultants. We are Infor Alliance partner. We were founded in Baltimore back in 1999. We are a nationwide practice of consultants spanning all different areas, supply chain, technology, finance, HR. So again, thanks for joining us today.
All right, so I'm going to kick us off today with a little agenda. So we'll be talking about what is vendor self-service, and then we'll be stepping through Infor's supplier order management, and then we're going to do a little show and tell, and then we've got a little bonus for everyone at the end and some integrations with supplier self-service.
Exciting stuff. So what is vendor self-service, huh?
So vendor self-service allows vendors to view purchase orders, 1099 forms, invoices, and payments, and basically just kind of gives an area where we can actually have our vendors register with inside of a portal and start kind of serving their own needs and getting information towards your business and your organization. So vendors can also maintain their contact and remittance information, discounts and payment terms. They can designate their contact persons, and it's a listing of commodity codes that can represent the goods and services that that vendor offers.
So it's a way basically for the vendor can log in and just share whatever information with the organization rather than have all these emails back and forth, sending letters, bringing all that detail together. And what you may not know is that Infor actually has a solution for this. It's called Supplier Order Management. And what it utilizes is the supplier portal, which is part of the SRM bundle, which is supplier relationship management, which is with contract management and strategic sourcing. So you don't necessarily need to have both of those applications in place, but if you do, there's just a way more that you can do. So just like Ben was noting, just like any kind of vendor self-service, you can view recent orders and submit invoices and send messages back and forth throughout your organization to your suppliers. So what we're going to do next is walk through some of these features and functionality so you can really see what this looks like. First things first, you really can enable your suppliers to register to do business with you. So you may have a lot of organizations just trying to get in the door. And this is a really great way to force the suppliers to log on to your portal. You can ask a series of questions. You may have a requirement that they have to fill out a form and show their proof of insurance. So you can have like a list of questions that you ask and have the suppliers answer them throughout the registration process. So here you'll have your own web portal, and if they don't already have a login, they can choose to register, and it just brings them through a variety of different steps. It starts with your terms and conditions, so just in order to do business with you, you're laying that out for them. And then from there, they'd fill out their contact information and all of their company information. And then depending on how you're configured, you can choose to have basically a approver throughout the process. So, someone that's logging in afterwards once they've gone through the registration process, so they fill out all the forms. And from there, someone can verify that they're now a available supplier to do business with. So here they can choose to view their status of whether or not they were approved. So once they are approved and they can go ahead and log in, this is an example of the portal that they'd see. And depending on what they have access to, they'll see different details display here on the left-hand side of the screen. So for this user, Stephanie Hop, who's me in a prior life, I have access to everything. I have access to see open events, any kind of contracts that, any bids that I was awarded and going through the contract negotiation process. And then it's really diving into order management, which again, depending on security, you can limit certain features and functionality that the supplier can see. If you have recall management, you also can enable the supplier to submit a notice through the portal. And then there's also the ability to do performance reviews, and from here they could see detail on that as well. So I'm most excited about the open order view, so I figured I'd start here. So as a supplier, I'm set up for Stryker Spine because that one seemed to have a lot of action in our sandbox, so I started here. And this is just showing me all the open orders that I have available for my organization, Stryker Spine. So here I can see when the POs were submitted, how much they were for, and what status they're in. I can drill in even further and see the items that are on those orders, which is really helpful, especially if you have a supplier who's trying to manage bill-only requests. This gives them a lot of visibility into whatever you're giving them access to. So here again, I can drill in even further and get cost detail on this PO. What's also helpful is I can see any kind of shipments that haven't yet been received, shipments that are due to arrive next week, depending on that estimated delivery date. I can see if any shipments are overdue. So they were showing that they, were due to come in last week, and I'm viewing them this week. And I also can see any kind of closed orders here. So really helpful, again, just to have the ability to have visibility into the current state at the organization. Next, I think it's really helpful to see what the recall process looks like from the supplier angle. And from here, they go through a variety of different stages here. They're entering detail about the notice itself, basically putting header information, and then it's going to start bringing them through the steps of entering in detail on the product itself. And here they can add multiple different items. They can attach documentations on the alert, and then it's going to bring them to a summary area for them to review before they submit it. And if you have recall management in use, it's going to go into a view for the recall administrator, recall manager, to start working on those notices and notifying the organization. Next, which is also super exciting, is allowing your suppliers to submit invoices.
Yep, so from within side of the screen here, we can actually create the invoice and designate an invoice number, specify some information such as company, description, invoice date, due date, some of the core header level invoice data points. The great thing too is from here we can actually attach the invoice image as well, and this is really important because not all organizations have a imaging system or a scanning system that could help them get those images in. So if you have a digital copy of it, you can actually attach it here and then have it go along with the life cycle of the invoice. We'll be talking a little bit more about that bonus that's coming up here in a little bit, but we have some cool ways that this can integrate with other Lawson financial applications. But at a core, this starts off with entering this AP invoice with inside of the AP20 screen. And then we have a few extra options in the event that you have some additional software where this can actually integrate with other aspects of Lawson.
So this gives you a couple different options. This one here is submitting an expense invoice, and next you actually can create an invoice from a purchase order in the system. So this may not be helpful for every single supplier vendor that you're working with, right? So a Stryker, for instance, you may be submitting EDI, and this is just helpful for them to see what's open out there, not necessarily to submit. But it's really helpful for mom and pop shops where you just really want to automate that process for your AP team. So I especially like this creating PO invoices because, again, it's giving more visibility into the system.
Yeah, it's a little quicker too from being able to stay within one location.
So here they're selecting the PO that they want to create that PO invoice from. They're giving it an invoice number. You also can decide whether or not you want to give them the ability to enter a due date. You'll have the ability to make changes to that, but you may want to cut that off from the start. And then from here, they can select that add button. And then that's going to pull up all of the PO lines that are available to them on that PO that they selected. So they can do the add all, or they can just manage by exception pretty much. Does that mean we have some questions? Okay, we've got some questions.
We do have a couple questions. Does submitting an expense invoice require manual efforts on the vendor's part?
Yes, they will have to type that information in, absolutely. Yep, so there's nothing automatic there, right? Because there's just no detail to build from.
Okay, and the next question is, how does the submitting an expense invoice functionality incorporate with the AP Invoice Automation module?
So that's actually what we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. That's a little bit of our bonus section. So if you give us a few slides, we'll actually jump into that here shortly.
There you go.
Excellent. Gotta love when a plan comes together. All right, so where were we? You can manage by exception, so you can add all and then remove from there. And then you can change your invoice quantity as well. So really helpful, again, to give that onus back on the supplier to help with that process. And then here, similarly to the recall area, they get a summary area to read through first before they go ahead and submit. So another helpful area is being able to review invoice exceptions. So they submitted everything, and then here it gives them a queue to start looking through them. So anything that has that exception is going to give them that red exclamation point, and then you can hover your mouse over it. So here we're viewing that invoice that we submitted is overdue, and we're waiting to get paid.
Yep, gotta check those exceptions.
So again, similarly to the other screens, we can view these invoices at different statuses, and then we can choose to drill into the details and check our overdue payments all in one area. So what do we need to do to make this happen, right? So within the SRM rich client, so again, whether or not you're using Supplier strategic sourcing or contract management, you're going to update in your supplier group, and here it gives you a bunch of different options. From what we just showed you, basically it's integrating with the accounts payable module, but you can choose to change that to process through AP Invoice Automation. If you don't have APIA in use, you're using your imaging system for that. There's certainly some things that you can do to just configure those changes and have the data go over to your imaging system instead. Some other things that are helpful is you can default the PO invoice handling code here and change certain access points. You also can modify what type of text you want the supplier to see in certain screens. Yeah. So really, if you have APIA in use, all you're doing is flipping this flag and hitting save, and
it routes it differently.
There you go.
All right, so we're going to jump into our bonus section, which is an APIA overview. So this is that aspect that we were talking about. That's the AP Invoice Automation. And so what this does is it actually facilitates a new way to kind of use the same accounts payable functionality, the AP20 screen that we're fairly familiar with inside of the Lawson applications. So what kind of invoices go through APIA? This is a pretty important one. It's all of them. Sometimes we get questions on whether it's a non-PO or just POs. Get questions about service POs and such. And the good news is that APIA can take any kind of invoice into the system. Where it kind of sits inside of the life cycle of your invoice. If you have a imaging system or a data capture product such as ImageNow or OnBase, Kofax, you can take that image in, and then depending on whether you have OCR as a part of that, you can help automate pulling some of that invoice data. And then APIA sits right after that process. And what APIA does is takes in that information and then helps automate the approval process associated with the invoice. So if you need to go through 2 or 3 levels of approval, if you only need to go through 1, or if there's some invoice scenarios where you don't need any approvals, APIA can help facilitate that and automate it, making the process a lot more efficient. Last but not least, our last box to the right in the arrow is the Infor Lawson financials arena. So that's the rest of the AP processes, such as check payments and month-end closing and such. So that all integrates together.
Wow.
Yep.
Pretty impressive.
So talking a little bit more of where APIA fits with inside of the Invoice Lifecycle, it is a part of Infor's landmark financial apps. We see a lot of customers with version 10 that are actually looking at APIA and implementing it. It is an add-on to Lawson AP. And what it does is it integrates directly into Lawson financials, which really helps with getting real-time access to data. So a lot of imaging systems use this platform of a flat file that kind of passes data back to the imaging system to help populate and gather information. Whereas when you have APIA in the Lawson financials realm, you get real-time data and real-time access. It does make entering invoices a lot more simplified. It also makes it a little bit more secure because you remove that aspect of people incorrectly entering a company that doesn't exist or a GL account that doesn't exist. So definitely helps in that process. Security and routing is based on customer-defined rules, so it's very dependent on the business and the organization's needs. And it really provides faster access to the complete invoice information. So you can follow that invoice through its entire life cycle from when it is entered to when it is sent out for approval, when it's paid, or if it's in an exception state. And the great thing about this is it's all role-based. So you have processors, you have approvers, managers, and administrators. So it kind of helps facilitate that entire invoice lifecycle.
Wow. So it sounds like it can do a whole lot more than just straight AP20, right?
It can do a lot more, and it seems to be a lot better kind of interface for us when we're entering the data. When you bolt it up to an imaging system or an OCR capable system, it actually automates a lot of that data collection, which makes it pretty nifty.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds it.
Yeah.
I really like the perfect storm with the addition of the supplier order management through the supplier portal.
Yeah.
Seems like you can get way more with layering on
Very much
APIA.
so. Definitely. And you get to put some of the work on the vendor as well.
Yes.
For them entering that. So it's always nice. The last thing we're going to talk about with APIA is creating an invoice. So we saw some of those initial screens with inside of the vendor portal where you can enter an invoice number, company, invoice due date, and such. And what that ends up happening is when you select the AP Invoice Automation configuration, those are going to port in with inside of this screen. So we're going to have some of these values actually populated for us. So there's a little bit of automation there after we have the information entered, but we can have like our company populated, our vendor, invoice number, due date, and invoice date. Definitely helps when we're processing the invoices later on when it's in your AP department, because then you have, half the data to start and you don't have to go fishing around calling the vendor for invoice number or invoice due date, things like that. It's already been provided. So it definitely makes that overall process a little bit more efficient and a little bit more streamlined for you.
Great. So that was a quick one. We really just wanted to educate our community of what's out there. We've been getting a lot of questions and inquiries about a vendor self-service portal. And a lot of people just don't know that Infor has one available. So if you do have contract management in use or supplier strategic sourcing, you really can layer on the supplier order management. And again, it may not be a perfect fit for every single supplier, but it certainly is for at least your registration process, your vendor management process, and then depending on what you want to give access to for certain suppliers, it just gives you a lot more visibility, a great communication source for both your organization and the supplier. And then really layering on some other tools like APIA can just really make that process better for again, yourself and your suppliers that you're doing business with.
Definitely.
Any other questions? We love questions.
So if you have questions at a later time, you can always send them to us, questions@rpic.com, or email Stephanie or Ben directly, and we'll do our best to answer them. I do want to thank Stephanie and Ben for this great presentation and all of you for attending.